Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Audsley, if you don't know me, and I am the Writing Across Media Facilitator for Vermont Studio Center. And thank you so much for being here. It is a pleasure to be hosting these two wonderful readers tonight. Francine Connolly. As a performance artist, Francine Connolly has written, produced, performed, and toured a number of multimedia collaborative productions. She has a full-length collection, What Sweetness from Salt, from Finishing Line Press, a chapbook of poems, How Dumb the Stars, from Parallel Press, as well as many individual poems published. She is one of 6 founding and still active members of Franco-American touring theater company, Le Théâtre de la Chandelle Verte, which tours a selection of commissioned plays such as Femmes de Lettres. Our second reader tonight is Carrie Mar. The official bio is as follows. Caroline Mei-Lin Mar is a high school health educator and poet, a San Francisco local. Carrie is doing her best to keep her gentrifying hometown queer and creative. She is a graduate of the MFA Program for Writers at Warren Wilson College, an alumna of VONA, and a member of Rabble Collective. She has been granted residencies at Vermont Studio Center and Ragdale, and is a member of the board of Friends of Writers. Her first collection of poems, Special Education, was a winner of the X.J. Kennedy Prize and is forthcoming from Texas Review Press next month. I have a couple questions for Carrie and Francine to start us off tonight. So you are both alumni of Vermont Studio Center, and Vermont Studio Center hosts month-long writing residencies as well as 2-week residencies for writers and visual artists. And I was wondering if you could talk about how you spent your time here at Vermont Studio Center when you were here 2 different occasions. I know, Carrie, you were here twice, and Francine, I'm not sure what year you were here, what month, but feel free to talk about, you were here twice too? Oh, great, yeah. Go ahead. What were you working on? What was your experience here? How did you spend your time in residence at Vermont Studio Center?
So Carrie, I think I was on the list to go first, so I'll just go first. My time, each time was different. My first time was they were each 4 weeks, and the first time I focused on this book, actually, and that's where I met a really vital community of writers and readers. Stephanie Danler, actually, who's on one of the blurbs, was, I felt, a reader who really helped edit my work, and I was on the top floor of where the writers meet, and we we had a lot of conversation and influence on each other's work. So I would say that was time 1, and time 2 was more recently in 2018, and another 4-week stint in the winter. So the first time was summer and the second time was winter, and I worked on new material that I'm still teasing out into what I hope will become a second book I'm working on now. So the best outcome of Vermont Studio Center for me really was the same experience that I had at Warren Wilson, where I got my degree, is this very hybrid community of material artists with writers. And since my background is both in the material and the performing arts, I felt like it was a perfect place for me to write something and then walk over and see somebody paint. And that, to me, is, I cross-dress in the arts, and so that Vermont Studio Center really answered what I look for as an artist. And I get restless, and that restlessness was answered in that particular residency in ways that others that are just on writing or just on photography wouldn't do for me. So I cherish Vermont Studio Center deeply for that reason.
Yeah. I think I similarly went twice, the first time for a month in October of 2016, and the second time I was only able to do 2 weeks in 2018. And Definitely some parallels. And Francine, you went first, and I remember you talking about how amazing it was when we were meeting in Rabble, and I think that was part of what encouraged me to apply. The first time I was there, it was October. It's gorgeous. The leaves are turning. It's magical. I worked on this first collection that's coming out in 2 weeks, special education. And then the second time I was there, maybe I think I was working on new work for what I think is going to be my second collection, but it was only a month later, but it was so cold and snowy. And I was like, oh, Vermont in November is not Vermont in October. But that's sort of the magic of the place. Like it's gorgeous whenever you're there, I think. And it's true, the other artists, like open studios, I was always so excited. The different resident talks and the visiting artist talks, I ended up becoming friends with, for my first time there, a visual artist who was there as a painter, and then also the visiting guest writer who was there for, a week and a half. And then we all started having like vegan sushi together back in San Francisco when we all got home. And I think it's a really great opportunity for folks to do some of that cross-pollination that you mentioned.
Yeah, Vermont Studio Center has been closed due to COVID-19, and we're just being really careful about hosting residencies and making sure that they're safe when we have people here next. And I really miss having the buzz and the energy and the vibe that happens when people are in their studios and there's open studios, and the interacting with artists and writers, visual artists and writers. There are the conversations that happen are just like really interesting. You're not always like discussing first person versus third person, or there's other things to talk about when you have a bunch of visual artists. So my next question is,
mealtime is also really important. Mealtime. Vermont is where a lot of my collaborations happened. So it's really a unique time, more than other residencies. The mealtime, the 3 meals a day, became so integral to the art making. And that's kind of what we do with Rabble, but we'll talk about that later. So with food.
So you both have, Carrie, your book's coming out soon, and Francine, your book came out last fall. I was wondering what the publication process looked like for both of you. What was your experience like bringing those books into the world?
You go, Carrie, because you're fresh. Yeah.
Long and not easy. I think I started an MFA program, which is how Francine and I met. Almost 10 years ago. And I went in realizing like I was starting to have the idea for the shape of a possible book. And I had written maybe a couple of poems toward that project or that goal I had in mind. And then I spent another, 6 years writing them. And then in 2016, I was like, I think I have enough here. And so at VSC during that month, I was like, my goal while I'm here is just, I'm going to retype the whole thing and I'm going to put it up on the wall and I'm going to figure out how it becomes a thing. And then I started sending it out in the spring of 2017. And I gave myself 3 years. And I was like, I'm going to send it out for 3 years. My goal was to send it out 100 times, get 100 rejections before I was like, it's not going to work, and putting it in a drawer. I did not get to 100 submissions, but I did get to almost 3 years, and I was starting to get pretty anxious, and I got, some lovely feedback and a couple of finalist things. And I think I made a joke to Francine about feeling like always a bridesmaid, and never a bride. And what a stupid metaphor. The patriarchy is everywhere. Anyway, it didn't win things, and it didn't, and it didn't, and it didn't. And then all of a sudden in December of 2019, it did. And it felt sort of mind-blowing and really exciting, and then terrifying in a new way. And then, you wait almost a year for the thing to become a real thing on paper. So slow, but worth it, I hope. Francine, how about for you?
I'm not going to belabor. I will say it was very similar. And since Carrie and I are part of a collective, she's witnessed more than many of how I started to gripe about the amount of money one spends submitting to contests. And I have a lot of concerns about that in general for people who are among the poorest of the earth, being poets. That we submit all these things to things that just seems like money gone down the drain. But my collective kept me upbeat, and I decided I didn't want to spend more time submitting, so I got an acceptance from Finishing Line, and I was very happy with the history of it, and also friends from Warren Wilson who wrote in to tell me what they in supporting words, what they thought, how I should go forward. And then I had a very hands-on experience. So I was able to have the person that I wanted to design the book cover. I had a lot of leeway artistically that Carrie and Rabble and I talked about. Other folks we know in our field have not had as much insight or input into the making of their books. So I'm of mixed minds about how one would do it in the future, but I feel very happy. I don't feel like this is the only experience I have in terms of how I want a book to become. My original hope was that it would be artisanal. I had a woman who was going to make the book, and then she had health issues. So I feel like I'm definitely an artisanal person who loves the beautiful book, the very handmade look in general, and less the manufactured. But that's, everybody has their shtick. So I enjoyed the process, but I think I would like to try something different next time.
Well, both of you have referenced your collective a few times, and I know it's both very important to both of your practices as well as the other people who are in your collective. And I was wondering if you could tell me more about your collective and how it was formed and anything else you would like to provide. And P.S. I'm jealous. Just because it seems like you all have been able to really support each other and that you're a tight-knit group, and it shows, and I really respect and admire your collective. And I'm going to drop a link into the chat for your collective.
Oh,
tell us more about Rabble.
Hey, Carrie, you want to start?
Sure.
Since I spoke.
Yeah, so everyone who's in the collective did overlap at least somewhat in grad school, which I think was our first intro to each other. And several of us were at AWP, which for those fellow writers who've been to AWP, you know what an utterly overwhelming experience it is, like on a sensory level, on a professional level, on an amount of consumption of alcoholic beverages level. So AWP is this huge writing conference for other folks, and there's just nonstop panels from like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And it's 12,000 writers in some conference center in some city, and it can be a lot. And we were in a panel, a few of us together who were friends already, and this panel was a collective talking about their experiences, the Dark Noise Collective, and why they'd created a collective. And at some point I was crying, and Somaya Shams, who's here, was also crying. We just looked at each other and we were like, we want something like this. Like, we want to be intentional and build a thing. And so then we started talking about it more and more, and we were staying at Francine's house and we were having all these amazing conversations. And so we started talking about, and Francine, you'd been in collective types of organizations before. And so we just started talking about, what does it mean to build an intentional community for each other as writers? Who do we build this community with? And sort of created that space together. And that was, gosh, it's been more than 5 years, I think. I mean, Francine, what else would you say about how we show up and what we do together?
I would say that I think you said that beautifully. I would just add that we came together out of a mutual yearning for more space to be in ways that we didn't feel the field was welcoming. And some of it has to do with being identified as women. Some of it has to do with being identified as women of color, women of different genders, sexual preferences, you name it. So different identifications. And we are restless in our identifications. We are dissatisfied with the ways that we are asked to be. And so we came together with these mutual dissatisfactions that became these long conversations that then beautifully morphed into these elaborate dinners and these elaborate experiences of so much pleasure together that we decided, I think Adrienne, who goes otherwise by AG in our collective, said for her, the leading principle is joy and love. So somehow we all wound up in my living room at the time and decided to form this thing that now, so many years later, we have met annually, and we snuggle, we spoon, we talk, we eat, we share work, we travel to see each other. So we're an unusual collective in that, is that we're very intimate in ways that we model after other collectives that use very much that experience of creative family togetherness. Though we write differently, we are very much a supportive structure. And I think that that was necessary for people in our position who felt like the field wasn't really, it was hard to find your place where you fit, you know. And it's not that you need to fit, but it's that we found a way to be together where I always know that Rabble has my back no matter what, even if I fail in the sort of legitimizing world of writing and I get so many rejections, I know that Rabble is like the one that's going to boost me up. So I think that that's kind of what it serves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, there's this piece about what you said about having each other's back. I teach my students, right? I teach a 9th grade, like health and well-being class. We talk about the difference between fitting in and belonging. And I think unfortunately in the arts and capitalism, the way so much of that works, there is a lot of fitting in. What's, you know, the trend these days? Who are the cool kids in the publishing industry? And I think Rabble's a place where I've found really deep belonging. And another thing that I think is magical is, in addition to those like annual meetings, we've always been scattered. And so we've always done monthly or twice a month virtual meetings. And so Rabble in some ways is one space that, you know, in this world of COVID-19 and doing stuff virtually, that was one place where I actually felt my routine hadn't changed, because it was like, well, you know, Somaya used to live in Tulsa and AG was in Houston and Francine is in Sweden, but we would all meet on Google Hangouts, and like, we're still doing that now. And that felt more normal, I think, than a lot of other things. And so I've been just so grateful to continue to have that space, and also to have readers. Like, I feel like we know each other's work so well after so many years of workshopping together and sharing what our goals are as artists. I think that there are 3 readers who, it's hard to find people who will read your work that way.
Absolutely. I agree.
Thanks so much for describing what sounds like a dream, to have that form of community for each other. Now I would like us to shift and invite Francine to read first, and then we'll have Carrie read.
So I'm going to read one poem in the collection. I have different lengths of poems, and this is actually a poem I've never read to community yet, but the woman to whom it's dedicated privately is going through a time in her life, and so I wanted to read it for her to energize her. And the thing about the poem that I just want to say in advance is it's a long poem, so I'm going to mark every shift in it by a snap. But I also want to say that it combines some of the interests that I have in hybrid thinking through the arts, through the plastic arts, and also words. And you'll hear some references to some artists that I can talk about after. But this is called The Bat Situation. I drive away, Just you and me, Mom. My son doesn't turn to look at his father, leaving us, his body haunting into the outline of a rear view. A blue crayon picture of a valley, a mother, hurried, scribbled hair, a boy, boomerang smile. Fire beneath them, they are floating, gliding into a yellow awe. But what about the rough black strokes that cross the sky? I can't snap with my left hand. When my father left us, my mother drank her nightly glass of wine and cast longer glances at the back door. It wasn't through thresholds I imagined his return, but through the endless fractures of plaster cracks on my white ceiling, webbed lines like an X-ray of tiny broken bones. At a New Year's Eve warehouse art party, the clock rings midnight. I kiss a man with a mustache. There's no difference between old and new husbands. My lips are parted, body unsuited in a crowd of costumes, artists who take pictures of themselves with a trick camera while above us techno beats blue, red, blue, red. After he left, my mother replays her loss through mine and decides we must see Eve Klein's Blue Women, so we go and watch a looped silent film that documents the making of his blue paintings, naked women who squirm while groups of men in suits smoke and watch and point and smoke and watch and point, and clustered firemen in hats aim hoses at them and spray down their untouchable skin, douse them head to toe in paint until smeared so blue their white teeth flash and blue breasts bob. These untouchables slither, women laugh so laughably blue their limbs are fractured, wings flapping dumb against a white canvas, ground made to be a sky as if they are birds dying, blue into white and drowning in depths, or blue they writhe in paint, their hair tangled as seaweed they stumble, spin, and Eve, he just glides back and forth, dodging blue spray, his lithe, bony fingers with nails sharp as claws clutch his cigarette as he would the outcome of each canvas, unknown as the ash of his cigarette burning down to nothing inside his mouth. It is all burning down. I spy a bat in a panic white tub, wings tucked beneath his brown furred belly, delicate feet, long bony fingers. How did he get in here? He must have heard me enter the apartment, maybe thrashed against the walls until his heart seized midair or dropped to his death for no other reason than he couldn't go on, not clutched to something. Because he does not understand the word dream, my son says, his eyes almost closed, wait for me to leave. To dream is to leave, which means I must stay with him until he sleeps so deeply he doesn't notice me leave. I will never leave you, even when I'm gone. The room holds the song of our breathing, and deeper inside our walls, bats cluster. My bat situation, I say to Herman, the landlord, referring to the problem I need fixed. The sound of each letter spreads over my tongue the way as a child I watched my father, a painter, stretch white canvas taut over each hammered wooden frame. After I tell her about the dead bat found in my tub at midnight, George yells, "Right on! Bats are shamanistic signs of rebirth." She pulls me outside to smoke, curse, offers a sip of whiskey from a jam jar hidden inside a paper bag, promises not to cry since she's not in love and it's another new year. A bat's skeleton is the framework for wings. They're dumb flyers, mutters Herman. Your bat must have snuck through those cracks in the floor, he goes on, pointing downward with a shaking index, or some odd fault. His hands tremble the way my father's did when he searched for beads or small toy bits I pretended to lose in my room. Once, my father crouched and stuck 3 fingers into a crevice along the floor, yanking a red ribbon I'd funneled into a hole on purpose. Then he shook as if splintered, but he was crying, tears like insects on his face. "Dad? She's leaving me," he gasped. Too drunk and swooned by music, George mistakes the window for a door, shrieks, "Hey, how the hell do you get back in that hole?" "Fuck it," she slurs, twisting her body and pulling me through the frame. "No risk, no rapture." Inside these walls, its dampness so dark, only fit for bats. There must be colonies living and dying inside your room. Herman grins as he says this, looking straight through me. This is how we move. Our hands caress the walls the way my father smoothed each canvas before he painted nudes. I spot a fracture in the wall, but I don't tell Herman. I wait for him to find it, think, go ahead, fill it. He winks. My phone rings. It's him. I want to come back. I'm done with blue. I don't trust Eve Klein. I don't trust a man who left and calls from an overseas island where cold means negative blue. Nothing to do for these nameless, faceless blue women, all but dead and gone and hung in a cove after cove, outlines filling space. There must be one who begs, "Stay, wait," for me to leave. Then I find her in another room, not blue, but melancholia, gray and black, Durer's engraving unsuited against the wall's vast white sheen, supplicant of loss, sulked, surrounded by keys, a globe. She sits, a downcast gaze washing the ground, counting the missing. She ignores the bat hovering above her. The inscriptions claims bat, darkness, and woman as allegory. Melancholia is the world. Or maybe it says something else. My sight is failing. George is kissing a woman with blood lips at the heart of the pit. She is ecstatic melancholia. She is music, the world. She is darkness and everything I want to forget. Look! She stops, eyes me from the heart of the throbbing, her lit blue cheeks smeared in lipstick. I am here, I mouth slowly, pointing to the wall behind her, where a bat grins, its eyes alive, absolute fire. Thank you.
Woo-hoo! Oh, I love that poem. Thanks for reading that one, Francine.
Yes.
So now we're going to talk a little bit. I have some questions for you, Francine. Yeah, agree with Adrian in the comments. Straight fire on that poem. So you mentioned earlier cross-dressing in the arts. And we talk a lot about defying genre, and you're a theater performer. That came up in your bio, in addition to being a poet. And you mentioned loving the cross-pollination, the visual artists, and you write a lot of ekphrastic poems. So the Bat Situation talks about Eve Klein's work and other work. You also have other poems in the collection, like An Old Woman Cooking Eggs and The Wedding Portrait. What do you think it is, if you can put a finger on it? What about visual arts stimulates poetry for you? Why do they bring out poems?
For me, it's about texture, and it adds layers of texture to questions of seeing. So in the book, the collection, I'm reaching down to grab it, in What Sweetness from Salt, I'm interested in investigating and dismantling relationships of kin, like motherhood, family, love, all those things that happen in our juicy lives. And I found that in the conversations I had and the reflections I had, and even Vermont Studio Center was pretty important in this, is that artists of all media are looking at the same questions. And Louise Bourgeois, famous artist, features quite prominently in this book. And she said better than I could that she always returned to the same subject, and she gave herself the leeway to do so in multiple forms. So I started in sculpture, and then I went into performance, and after performance, the whole time I was writing. But so I've always gone back and forth between the arts, and I don't feel satisfied by one. And so I think that my relationship to the tactile arts, and also in looking, as you said, Carrie, the poems that engage other paintings or sculptors in the book, are because they too are asking the same questions that I am. So it helps me feel less unique, and I enjoy that. And I also enjoy just not being bound by language only. I really love the texture available in paints. I love the texture available in clay, in plaster, and all sorts of other media. So that's something that feeds very much the way I used to say when I first started writing as a wee lassie, that I wanted to dig into my paper. I wanted to actually physically dig into words. So I used a manual typewriter because it felt more tactile, it felt more tangible. Less light than the keyboard on the computer. So that gives you some insight into how I write. And Eleanor Wilner, who's a mutual inspiration to us, was one who also very much encouraged me to look into paintings. So
Yeah.
does that answer you?
Yes, absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you. I think my second question for you is that lately, COVID-19 has come up a few times, missing people, especially seeing all these beautiful faces in this room. A lot of my conversations lately have felt like they focused on what's hard in the world and things feeling pretty impossible. But I'd love to hear from you about something in your writing or in your reading these days that feels exciting or hopeful or possible to you. What's bringing you joy?
I think what brings me joy is how the distance apart has really focused those friendships that for me really matter. So social distance has heightened the quality, and some of those friends are here actually now. And it has helped me whittle down the essentials. And so that is exciting in the writing too, is that what I'm writing about now is surprising me. Also in form, it's not just poetry. I'm interested, as I've shared with you, Carrie, in hybrid forms and essay, creative essay, and fiction, short fiction, not novel, but short fiction. And so I have found in that solitude, that time, but I've also found a restlessness, and right now I'm in transition again. And so Tommy Blount, who is a dear friend, also said, to me, he feels fallow. And I am also going through brief bouts of fallow, where I just want to be in this weirdness, and I told my son, I feel like an astronaut floating cut from the ship, but I can see the ship. And I said, I'm just going to hang out and check out the planets for a while. So it really alternates day to day, but I think that this is an interesting time. And I would say ultimately it has made me appreciate those connections and those sort of friendships that keep me from going too far adrift. So.
Yeah, thank you. I have a third question for you, but I know that it's maybe something that we both want to talk to each other about. So I might table that one, keeping my eye on the clock. And transition to the next thing, which is
the next
I
thing
read.
is you reading, Carrie.
Yes, I read. I'm like, let me find my document. Thanks for being here, y'all. Special education. 1, auditory processing deficit. I say now is not the time for this conversation. You hear, shut the fuck up, dumbass. I say open your books to page 253. You hear open. You hear books. You hear page, but never at the same time. You say, what? I say the same thing over again, rephrased or restated for clarification. You say, what? I say, look at the picture or the written instructions, follow along in the notes. You say, okay, I got it already. I say, your disability affects how you think about the things you hear. I say, pictures and writing and reading help you learn. I say, you need to double check the things you think you hear other people saying. I say, look at me. No, at me. You say, I don't need these special classes. You say, fuck you. I'm not fucking retarded. 2, emotional disturbance. The last time I saw him was the day he ran up and down the hall, kids egging him on as he dodged police we'd called because he'd eaten out of the trash can again, my trash can, a sandwich dipped in paint, yogurt cup full of old water, pencil shavings. When I asked him why he liked it, because there is already somebody's saliva on it. When I asked him why he did it, the voices. When I assigned homework, imagine your life in 10 years, he wrote, I hope I am not homeless. 3, conduct disorder. I dread your arrival even as I am tasked with your safety. How can I do my job like this? Even your freckles frown in oppositional defiance. I want to resist you, hell-bent on hatred, your bitter metal voice. I call hurt babies herpes. I throw my head back and laugh, then the other boys laugh. You are laughing, getting what you wanted and maybe what you didn't. It's not that I hate you, though sometimes, who could need more than this? You are mine, my ugly little love. 4, visual processing deficit. This is how it is. I'm watching your mouth move, the gloss around your orderly teeth, square and symmetrical, lined up like little blocks, the patterning to their click and close, while you tell me about this or that child in crisis, and I hear you with only one ear, while in the room, over your shoulder, behind my eyes, I am visualizing the certain cascade of Tetris tiles sliding into the spaces made for them, the holes left open, falling into perfect place. So this next poem I actually revised during my first residency at VSC. We meet so many talented writers there who become friends, and Hugh Nguyen and I met and decided to do like a mini workshop exchange, and he gave me some feedback on this. One of the joys of VSC. Uniform, after hearing Ta-Nehisi Coates speak. Long gone in rot, decay of the warm Virginia ground, swelter of summer. Riddled with wormholes, I can see it in my mind's eye, hanging in my grandfather's closet, though I know great-great-great-great-grandfather was buried in it. Memory inhabits our heritage, the way you spoke of imagined whiteness binding together slave owners, slave owner aspirants, as great-great-great-great-grandfather must have been to be buried in beloved Confederate gray. I imagine the cap, crossed rifles resting above a placid, generic, dead white man's face. How fast decay happens in humidity's hug, that embrace I love to walk into when I leave my own cold hometown. My body feels built for the heat, like my mother's freckled body, our old Virginia line. I don't even remember his first name. I imagine the bodies that fell around him and his drummer boy son, then his grandson, great-grandson, fighters in every major war of this democracy you spoke about. I have not gone to war. My mother's daughter, our bodies never acclimated to the damp cold of my fog-locked city, the Pacific's wind-drawn blanket. I am a daughter of a nation whose heritage, you said again, is plunder. I remember the brown body of my father, the way he angled toward me after we sold the house, when he told me I should keep the money for myself, just in case. How the fog plunders the sky for space. Because marriages sometimes do not work out, because my wife didn't come from money, and who's to say that what is mine is truly hers? What vow, what promises matter when you're looking at that kind of bounty, like the wet earth blooming sunflowers where once there were graves? To hold a piece of dirt or a dollar or a human being, say, this here, it belongs to me. I imagine the bodies of my Virginia relatives at the last family reunion. I was curious, but too fearful to attend. What if I was the only brown body? What if I was not? What if there was tension between the black and the white McDonoughs? Or what if the white ones tried, they always try, to enlist me? What if we met under a tree, a spot of shade in the unbroken heat, a resting place, that tree where once, I do not want to imagine. You said being moral was easy, said we have to consider what is just. I imagine the uniform again, hanging cold in a cedar-scented closet. I imagine the smell and the heat on my face, distorted from flame, burning that house to the ground. My fingers still stroking the textured wool, the fragile fraying, the moth holes. So this next poem was also written at VSC that first time I was there as I was finishing this manuscript, and I knew there were a few more poems that I needed. And this poem, I think, also is a transition in some ways because it takes up some of the themes that my more recent work has continued. Tongue. Things I remember, my mama's voice, loud and clear, the language I spoke, then forgot, then spoke again, and have now almost forgotten. The way I would transliterate the words for my mother, 100-character test prep. She would read my letter words, all sound with no meaning, and I would write them down. I would check my own work. I always check my work, and you should too. It is the best test-taking strategy. This will be on the test. Everything is on the test. Yeah was asked at Angel Island how many steps to his neighbor's house, how many chickens in the yard. At least I think he was. I have taught history. I know these were the standard questions. What answer is correct? I have no chickens in my yard. There are 14 stairs to my front door. No, 13. No, there were fewer stairs if you went through the back door. It was easier on Mama's bad knee. My father's stories about that staircase childhood tumbles frightened me. It all bleeds into one story. I don't remember how it ends. I don't know yet. Make sure you follow along. So I'm going to read one poem from my new work, and then I'll close with a final poem from the book. And this new work was also a project. VSC is like responsible for so much. I started that project after I'd finished my manuscript for special education. And my new work thinks a lot about language and the failures of translation and family histories. sorry, hot. The water a guest inside of us, salty, sweet, and swimming, how water does. And you, a guest in your own house, a watery word, a guest on the tongue, a gust of air across wet lips, a voice echoing back and back, though nothing's left to prove it. No papers, no shred of evidence, not one letter, not one mark upon the page. No papers, your papers, for a period of 3 long years, an ocean away from where you are not, a guest. Where are you from? People ask me, ask people who look like me, look like anything but the blankness of a page. Let me turn then to the color of water into ink ground against a stone, the words carried back by each water guest, each bringer of news and love and tribulation. Here are the words that belong to you. Here are the words that belong. Post-racial ghazal. The snow could be a metaphor for whiteness. My marriage could be a metaphor for whiteness. Here is what won't kill me, my non-blackness, my what are you anyway, my almost whiteness. When we carried the baby out into it the first time, so eager, he cried as it hit his face. Such coldness, such whiteness. The latest viral video, cop tipping the wheelchair off the curb, crosswalk looming, screen gone to whiteness. I've often wondered what it would be like to die in the snow, covered in a whiteness that feels like blues. You undo it. You undo it, I'm sobbing. You fix it, so I am not so alone in the face of your whiteness. Another black body drops in the blue-black night. At work, we have to start talking about whiteness. Sometimes on the mountain, I fall. Everyone far ahead of me, my slow turns through the wide, sparkling whiteness. I don't want it to be personal. I don't want it to be my story, our story, inescapable whiteness. I know his daughter, another body angry as I am, careening down a hallway. Get your white ass hands off me. She worries through tears that our relationship will not survive it, her whiteness. When I panic, I feel like I'll stop breathing. Consider not breathing, succumbing to the bright light's whiteness. There is no snow left in our yard. We mourn the losses of a changing climate. We miss its whiteness. We never call each other's names. I love you, baby, as we lie down, finally, in the darkness. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Carrie. Is it my turn, Sarah? You can just give me a nod. Yeah?
Yes, it's your turn.
So I have so many things going through the freeways of my mind. And I first want to just thank you for sharing those poems. It's so wonderful to hear you read again. And I have these questions, but I so desperately want to detour from them, but I won't. I want to stay close to your first collection, Special Education, knowing that you're working on your second. And your first collection that you read a bulk from tonight lists you in your bio as a health educator and poet. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about, if you can say more about those identities that you grow in and out of in this collection, since even in the pieces you read tonight, you have some that are framed by the classroom, and then others that are those uncertain identities that I'm not going to say you as in you, Carrie, because I know that we fictionalize ourselves, but whatever identities you're negotiating in these poems are intersecting with that classroom environment. And if you can talk more about how you thought about that in the wholeness of this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first container sort of that I thought about for the book way back in 2011. I think it was really about, for me, thinking about writing my way into some of the things I was experiencing as a new teacher. Teaching is such a remarkable experience and gift. I know we've talked about that. And sometimes it's really fucking hard. I don't know, am I allowed to swear? And I think I started out, as a high school teacher, and I started out in special education, and I did that for 8-9 years. I think, you mentioned earlier the questions that we keep returning to in different ways. And I think for me, this question of identity, of like, who are we as people, is a question I come to obsessively over and over again. And I think partly that's like put upon me by society and like by white supremacy, like as a mixed race person, as a queer femme who's straight passing, like people are often confused by me, and people often ask me, what are you? Which is a very strange thing to ask a person. And so I think very early on in my life, I started to think about like, what does that mean? What are you? Yeah, what am I? Beyond, just being like, do you mean where did my ancestors come from? And so I think too, and I think especially, as like a 25-year-old going into the classroom, I thought I really was very grounded in that as like, okay, I'm like a queer woman, I'm a person of color, I'm like radical, and I'm gonna like go in and like shake things up and be an ally to my students and like disrupt this really problematic system. And then to my kids, they were like, I don't know, you kind of look like a white lady. Like you're just another lady who's like yelling at us and telling us what to do, right? And my students did not see me as a natural ally, right? In special education in San Francisco and in general, especially in segregated class or like separate day classes for kids with learning differences, majority male, majority Black and Latinx. And so these teenage boys were looking at me like, what are you talking about, lady? And so I think that really pushed me to be like, oh, right, identity is a thing I question and I'm obsessed with. And then how do I write at that from different angles that allows me to complicate how I'm showing up, what I care about, and also the ways that, like, as an educator, certainly, I'm going to fail in that. I work inside of a system that's like deeply oppressive to young people, all of them. And so, how do I hold that complicatedness? And I think poetry is so wonderful because it is a place that allows us to hold complexity.
Wonderful. And I think in Rabble, most of us, if not, are directly or indirectly educators. So we do frequently talk about the failure of reaching, and we intercall each other and say things aren't working, especially since mutant Ninja Orange Tangerine was elected. Our concerns have been heightened. But so I want to ask you a little sidestep here. Our collective, for those of you who are interested, was in part, not directly, but later, deeply inspired by the Combahee River Collective of women who wrote, eventually there's a collection called How We Get Free. And that book was a very important influence on the way that we structure our conversations. And one of our ongoing questions as a collective, a prompt, is, how do you get free? And we keep coming back to the question. And I was thinking about it this morning when I was reading Melissa Febos for a class I'm teaching, who I also met at Vermont Studio Center, and who's a dear friend now, is she often said to me why she goes to creative writing is because she's allowed to change her mind. So I feel allowed to change my mind on subjects that I broached in my first book. I feel like How We Get Free, we're always allowed to change our mind. How do you write toward getting free? And how would you say that this question of how we get free continues to be important to you in your work and also as part of the Rabble Collective?
Yeah. And I hope you're thinking about your answer to this too, because this is the question that I also have for you, because how do we get free has been such a conversation. And I think being influenced by Combahee and Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, who wrote How We Get Free. I think part of it is, I think as a writer, one way that I'm feeling about getting free lately, after similarly having some fallow periods that you mentioned, has been thinking about form and changing that up. I've written almost entirely and published almost entirely poetry. But as you know, and I shared some work with Rabble the last time we did a workshop together in person, which was a while ago now, experimenting more with prose forms that are a little more hybrid. Like, is this like a really long prose poem in sections? Is it a lyrical essay? Does it know what it is? I think, so for me, form is a way to get free, to disrupt and buck up against some of those expectations that are placed on us, whether through art or whether through society. I think in my work as an educator, getting free is hard and intentional. I think a lot of it is where, I mentioned in some of those poems, things, that guzzle, like, oh, at work, like, oh, we need to start talking about whiteness. I think I wrote that poem, when I was working at my last school, which means it was at least 6 or 7 years ago, right? But it could have been written last week with the things that it's talking about, right? Majority white educators being like, what's happening in our schools? Like the police continuing to be who the police are in relationship to policing Blackness in this country. So I think there's also, like, part of how we get free is also continuous education and conversation. And that's something that I love about Rabble. And another influence for me around freedom is just thinking about, you mentioned earlier that AG talks about joy. I listened to a podcast that I love called How to Survive the End of the World. Feels very timely in its title. And, Autumn Megan Brown. Autumn I also met at VSC. I didn't even think about that in advance. And her sister Adrienne Marie Brown, they talk a lot about pleasure. And they talk a lot about doing things that you love as an artist, as an activist, and all of that. So I think constant learning, pursuit of joy, especially when that joy feels like resistance to, capitalism or patriarchy or other systems that don't want us to find joy without spending money on it or without like defining it through certain types of relationships. Those are some of the ways that I'm trying to get free lately. How about for you? How do you feel that comes up in your work?
I second, I third a lot of what you're saying. I would say that in addition to what you're saying, I work in forms that go against my natural habitat. I allow myself to write into whatever form needs to fit the thing that's troubling me. So that's a way of getting free. And then fundamentally, I think getting free is giving yourself the space and time to actually make. So it's about, I most recently in Rabble was talking about care structures and crafting a care structure into your day where you stay beholden to it. And I'm beholden to a care structure where even coming to your desk is an act of love, is an act of resistance, it's an act of joy. Even if it's an hour of staring into space and out the window, it is still a care structure that is a true sign of freedom, the freedom to wander, as I tell my son, the freedom to be bored. What delicious, what a luxurious activity to be bored, right? To not have anything to do, to just wander your gaze out the window. And I grieve that loss for him. His generation is such a cell phone generation. I grieve the loss of having absolutely nothing to do. So that feels like freedom to me as well. And again, in my art self, my material art self, a lot of the work I've created in terms of finding the freedom to, if I'm working on a character and I'm working with another actor and we're sort of stuck, we sort of wait until the time arises where the gesture happens, and in the freedom of that space to move, something occurs, a change occurs. And I think that I've heard writers who work very deliberately. I don't believe in slow writing, I believe in deliberate writing. It's this kind of thing that happens if you just have that time and space to let that moment occur, where you get up and you make tea or coffee and then boom, that thing turns. And I think that's freedom, the freedom to luxuriate, to enjoy time, to dilly-dally, to loiter in your work, to do whatever it is you need to do to take time. So it's a time taker thing for me.
Yeah, staring out the window. That's some good stuff.
Bliss.
Yeah. So necessary. And that's the beauty of residencies too, right? Is that
absolutely,
if you are given the gift of that space and time.
Yep. So Sarah, I'm not sure where we are yet on time. I always have more questions, but I can curtail her.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could switch to opening up to everyone to ask some questions to both of you. And if it's all right, I was going to switch it back to gallery view. So everyone, you're invited to unmute, turn on your video if you feel like it. We are still recording. This might get edited out, but if you do share your voice or your face, it might be reshared. And we are recording. I just want to let you know that. So feel free to raise your hand, unmute, ask our two beautiful poets questions, or put it in the chat. Yeah, it's open. The floor is open. Any burning questions or questions of process or what you're reading or anything.
Did I just go?
Yeah, go ahead. Sass,
actually, I don't have a question, but I just want to say I so loved all of your work that each of you read today. Was just so beautiful. Thank you so much. I feel good.
Thank you.
So good to see you.
That means a lot. Thank you.
Elizabeth.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you both. I've heard a lot about Rabble through Francine. We're very old friends. So to actually see the kind of extraordinary collaboration that I'm sensing through your readings today, and this like extended conversation that goes beyond the frame has been such a pleasure. And the echoes of different things in your work, I think is a testament to carving out space for that creative freedom that I'm very grateful to be a part of tonight. And I did have one question for Francine, because I know you've been talking a lot about epistolary, like you've hinted at this to me. So I just wanted to ask you, because since you both have been talking about changing and experimenting with different forms, maybe you could say something about your work with epistolary form?
That is part of a show that I hope to do post apocalypse when we actually go to the theater again. And that's when I had a year, 2019, I had a grant to go overseas to retrace Mary Wollstonecraft's solo boating trip in 1795, where she wrote letters to a spurned lover. And I instead had artist friends, actually some of whom from VSC write letters, and friends longhand, and I wanted to assemble a show about the intimacy of writing letters. And this is in part inspired from another French show that I did about women who wrote letters as their first literary emancipation from the 12th century to now. So my interest in the epistolary form is because I think it's very intimate. I think it's a dying art in the age of media. I'm talking pen or pencil to paper, hand, again, tactile, and licking and waiting for the response to arrive or not arrive, getting lost in the mail. I love all of those nuances, and I'm interested in making a show to that effect. But this wouldn't be a book of poems so much as an experience, a show that, since Elizabeth, I know you are also interested in the arts, and Agnes Varda, who recently died, her sort of installation art projects is the vision I have in mind, where people would come in and see the letters sort of floating or projections of text. So that's in the works for a time when people can actually attend a space and we can share a space and watch it disappear after an hour. So yeah.
Someday we'll be there again.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll ask a question here. Of course, always, I mean, I've had the pleasure and the gift of knowing you two for a very long time. And so it's amazing and wonderful to hear these poems. And one of the things that I had an opportunity to sort of write just my impressions of Francine's book when it was first coming out. And one of the things that I really marveled at was this notion of, particularly the ekphrastic, and I was glad that you read one of your ekphrastic poems this evening, about this notion of, as much as we sort of like the many different things that we turn to art for, and particularly I haven't been to VSC yet, but it's, it seems like it's a place where there's this wonderful conversation and collaboration that happens between artists and writers, of poets, prose writers. But I'm curious for the both of you, as artists, as poets and writers, and those who sort of art is our medium. I think one of the things that Francine's collection and I think also Carrie, your poems do as well, is sort of like question the ability of art to be able to at times provide consolation or even resolution. And I'm curious about sort of like the process of having to wrestle with that in the work, this notion of, us maybe wrestling with big questions that are possibly unanswerable, and how you negotiate that, whether, through the work itself or just your relationship to the work.
Carrie, I'm going to let you go first because I just yammered.
Okay, great.
Unless you want to, but I'm gonna mute for a second.
I'm happy to go first. I mean, I think, the failure of art is part of what I love about art. I say with much hesitation. I mean, I think any art form is partly about capturing a moment or a feeling. And I think that's what sometimes is really exciting to me about visual art. And I write far less ekphrastic poetry, I think, than Francine does. But I was similarly really energized by being in a space with the visual artists because of the ways that they make manifest, whether painters, sculptors, photographers, this is how you express an emotion without words. And I'm so often trying to find the right words, right? And grasping at how do I express an emotion with words, right? Because that is difficult as well. And so I think, and I'm also interested, a lot in, and I think I mentioned this in relation to like what it meant to write about my teaching or what it means to me to write about identity. Even if we capture a moment really beautifully, even if there's something gorgeous or spectacular, like there's so much that gets left unsaid. There's so much that gets left out. Like Francine's so frustrated with Eve Klein and like, there are all these ways that art does save us and also that it fails us. And I think especially in moments like this moment in the world, or in grappling with like what it means to be a teacher, is the art ever going to be enough? And also like, I cannot not make it. It is utterly necessary. It is utterly necessary for me to take in art that other people have made, because like without beauty, what do we have? So that's part of where my thinking is on that. I have no idea if I actually answered your question, but I'll let Francine share her thoughts.
Nathan, thank you for the question. I so dearly miss having you in the same room. But okay, I think that the thing about art that I will Carrie, piggyback off what Carrie was saying, that is so wonderful is how it can fail us. The object itself can fail us, but what I'm interested in also is how I don't feel seen. So I'm not always felt seen by art, and I look for those artists who also communicate. Since I'm also an educator, I have students who don't see themselves in the things that I show them, and so I have in the last, I would say a better part of a decade, been increasingly interested in looking at how it is that women, because I teach at a women's institution, women often feel unmet. And so the arts that I grapple with, I think, where am I in this frame, and how am I being seen, not seen, erased, evicted, and then from there on you add every layer after that: ethnicity, color, body shape, you name it. And so I'm interested specifically in art because it allows for a way that I can be in a bigger conversation with private obsessions I've had since being a kid, moving all over, constantly cities to small towns, always feeling othered than the so-called majority that I was a part of, and finding a real kinship in arts that grapple with those questions. So the frame, I saw you read not too long ago, Nathan, similarly interested in ekphrastic poetry, is that the frame provides such a beautiful restraint, the frame of the poem. And granted, I think through theater arts, so it's the body also, but I do feel like there's a limit in the things that the body can do. And I love those limitations that are available in ekphrastic poetry that are similar to people who have like a love affair with sonnets or some kind of specific form that really compresses how much passion you can evoke on the page. So it's the thing about seeing. I just love, I'll never tire of it. I will never tire of questions of misperceptions, seeing, failed ways of seeing, or even when I say to my kid, like, what do you see there? And he sees something totally different than what I see. So those kinds of, crossing lines are such, it's like, it's such, it's so productive. It's such good fodder, Does that answer you? Probably not. I'm not really interested in names.
You both are wonderful, and it's a big question, and so I
it's
think
a continued conversation.
Yes, it's a big conversation, but you both have continued to get started.
Just come to dinner. We'll talk when we can.
Thank you.
Dinner is crucial. Food is also
food is vital.
A big part of our artistic practice. Sarah, I'm seeing one question from Adrian in the chat. Should we perhaps take that as our final question?
Yeah.
Does that feel right?
Yeah.
I see.
The question is, Adrian writes, I've been thinking about this idea of the unsayable, and I wondered if there was anything in these collections that felt at first unsayable as you began to write them, or what these poems individually or assembled allowed you to confront or say. And in that way, perhaps it was making these books in any way, did that change you? I guess it is interesting to consider what we put on the page, whether we're seeing or noticing or describing or saying. Anyway, I don't want to paraphrase Adrian's question, but bringing forth, there is something scary about the debut because you can only debut once. But then also you hope that you have more to say, that there are other books within each of us and all of us. But what are we saying? And I don't know if that even matters to either of you. But were there things that you couldn't say or before, but you have this medium through which you're moving and saying something in the world?
have some initial thoughts on this. Do you want to answer first or second, Francine?
You go for it, Carrie.
I think, I think yes with a debut, and especially because the process takes a long time, like who you are as a writer changes. So I do think making the book changed me. I mean, certainly I was changing a lot as a writer over those years and thinking about it, but also like some of the poems, again, came from very early, my second, third year of teaching, which is really hard when you're a high school teacher. And now as a 12th year teacher, I don't think I feel the same way about some of the content of what I was writing about. So there's that. And then in terms of the unsayable, there was so much that felt unsayable to me because I was going to be writing about race and gender and class and disability. And I was like I'm gonna fuck up and I'm gonna unearth all of this like ugliness in myself and ugliness in the world. And do I want to put that out there? I had a lot of questions about whether or not I was stealing my kids' stories if I was telling them. And shouldn't they be able to write their own collections of poetry and tell their own truths, which probably look nothing like what I've put down to the page. And the first poem in the book is about that. It's about taking other people's stories and my ambivalence about that. And so I think a lot felt unsayable. And then I had a supervisor who advised me to just write it anyway, because I don't have to show it to anybody. Like, not every poem that I write is something that other folks are going to read. And I think giving me that permission to like write it all meant that I wrote a lot of work that ultimately didn't say what I wanted to say, but allowed me to fail at it in ways that got me closer and closer to the thing that I really was trying to write about. And I felt that again, even with this newer work that I've been doing, this second project. I had been trying to write poems about this place, Lake Tahoe, that's really important to me for years, and about like complicated feelings about this place, stolen land, class privilege, all these things. And all of them just came out being like, gosh, this lake is real pretty. I was like, why can't I do it? And then it was finally at BSC that I wrote one that was like able to complicate the place in a way that got at what I was really trying to say. So I think there were absolutely things that felt unsayable. I think there were things, even one of the ones I read tonight, right, where I talk about like we called the cops on a kid. Like, there's also so much that we change as people. How I've evolved as like an abolitionist. I would never call the cops on a child now. Like, yeah, well, I wouldn't call the cops on anybody. Like that. And so letting that stay in the poem and in the book and being honest to like that was the experience in the moment is also part of figuring out like how the self who shows up in the work is different from the self in the world.
AG, I would say in response that I think that there is always another version of some truth. The curious thing about poetry is people approach you and think that the poems you read are your truth. And I sometimes think whatever gave it that clout, that this is as much a fiction as any other. And so I think that there's a lot of prettiness in poetry that we can hide behind, and we sort of masterfully mask our different kinds of shame. And I think if I had an unsayable, I'm not sure what it is yet, except that I would like to write toward a kind of difficult love that I have experienced since the book came out. And I am it sounds vague, but it's as specific as I can get right now, is that I think that there are a confluence of events in the world and in my life that, and where I am now, that I am interested in writing more toward a kind of love and joy that I can see in the material I've written since, even if I am interested in the complexities that the world has on a local and a macro level. some of what I was dealing with in the book was the influx of information from friends and myself and in art, and the frustrations I had as a lot of women have about becoming a mother, and all the influences and the pressures and the sort of things that happen for us. But I don't necessarily feel that I'm there right now anymore. I'm interested in something deeper, more complex, and connections that we make with each other. And I would say that the unsayable that is in the book is the deep love that I have, for example, for mothers, my mother, a mother, that is harder to see at first in the book. And I think that that's something that I'm working on now. I'll stop there.
Are there any last burning questions or comments for our two poets this evening? It is so special to spend the evening with all of you, to hear our two poets read, and to be together. It's unexpected how much these evenings really make my heart beam and make me feel like art and poetry matters in the world so much, and that this gathering, these types of gatherings, mean more to me than all of the other stuff I'm doing on Zoom. So thanks so much for being here, and I would like to invite everyone to unmute and to give our readers a round of applause from afar.
Yay.
Gorgeous.
Thank you, Sarah, for creating this space and hosting this. It's such an exciting, invigorating conversation. So thank you. I'm excited to come to the future ones.
And thanks to everyone for logging on, logging in, logging on, checking in.
Yeah.
A real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take
Thanks.
care, everyone.
Amazing.
Bye.
Be well.
Bye.